Nigeria's House of Representatives is considering a bill titled Emergency Economic Stimulus Bill to extend relief to millions of Nigerians at this point and in the aftermath of the coronavirus outbreak. We'll be devoting the next half hour or thereabouts to talk about this with Oke Epia, journalist and publisher of OrderPaperNigeria, a compendium of bills and motions on the floor of both chambers of the National Assembly. Welcome to the program. Good morning.
Okay, Epia, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you.
Yes, well, Tundu already introduced this subject, the Emergency Economic Stimulus Bill being proposed by the House of Representatives. Now, we understand there are three major aspects of that bill: protection of jobs, deferment of payments payment of household mortgage bills, and then, of course, the third part, the waiver on import duties, particularly relating to materials that may be needed to check the coronavirus scourge. But if you may help us articulate the basic contents of the bill, and then I would like to know whether you still think that bill can see the light of day now that the National Assembly is on recess until further notice, and yet we're faced with an emergency.
Well, thank you, Dr. Ruben. First of all, the bill has been passed by the House of Representatives, so it should be on its way to the Senate for concurrence before it is sent to the President for assent. Secondly, and this is by way of an opening remark, I think that COVID-19 has provided an opportunity in spite of all of its risks and fears and troubles. And the opportunity, if you ask me, is that it brings for reforms. This is about time, even though everything is knee-jerk at the moment, quick, rapid responses here and there. But I think that we could seize the moments to undertake some far-reaching reforms that Nigeria needs. We need, surely, an economic stimulus bill that has just been passed in the House of Representatives. But we need other stimulus bills on, social stimulus. We need bills on political stimulus. We need to recalibrate and reset our country, But having said that, what the bill seeks to do, and I must commend the House of Representatives for the initiative, that this is a private member bill, and it's more like the entire House of Representatives that sponsored that bill, because it was sponsored by 10 individuals, the Speaker and 10 members and 9 other members of the College of Principal Officers. So that bill is representative of the entirety of the 360 members of the House of Representatives, if you may. So that initiative is commendable, especially given that we haven't seen and what should have been expected, that kind of initiative from the executive. Recall that Nigerians have been asking that there should be a presidential address. Recall that Nigerians have been demanding that there should be a holistic response from the executive. We haven't seen that. So for the House of Representatives to take this move and, take the bull by the horn, no matter how imperfect the bill may be at the moment, I think deserves some commendation, and we should not shy away from that. The bill, like you have noted, seeks to do certain basic three things, from my reading of the bill. It talks about a moratorium for mortgages for 180 days. It talks about preserving and protecting those in employment so that they don't get thrown out of jobs. It also talks about waivers for critical medical supplies and equipment that the country needs at these dire moments. So yes, it's an emergency bill, but I think that, like I've said earlier, we need to infuse other areas of national emergency into some form of bill or form of interventions from the legislature, and indeed from joint efforts between the legislature and the executive. We need to see a lot more going on because there are a whole lot of Nigerians who are not captured, who are not going to be impacted by that bill. How many people are employed? What is the percentage of Nigerians who are unemployed? You know that the informal economy drives this country, the much that we know. Are they captured in that bill, in the provisions of that bill? So these are some of the questions that we'll need to raise. And hopefully, as it makes its way to the Senate, and the Senate is expected to consider the bill with some alacrity, like the House has done, maybe some of these, observed, deficiencies or shortcomings, if you may, would be taken into account before it is passed and sent to the President for assent.
Indeed, some refining will have to be done. But what are your thoughts? Because there have been several suggestions. CBN has had their own, reeled out their own palliatives. FIRS, well, not yet state tax authorities, right? We haven't heard anything from the state, only the federal tax authority. And now the House of Representatives has stepped up to the plate. But as you were saying, it does not target the informal sector. What kind of palliatives need to be done? Because the obvious thing is cash handouts. Can we afford cash handouts? And there are also loopholes in the bill, such as the exclusion of oil companies. Oil companies, too, are facing dire straits because oil, we all see what has happened with crude oil. Their jobs are also imperiled.
Yes, I mean, oil companies are also facing, the backlash of COVID-19 globally, but we also need to, you need to understand that we need to get some taxation. The exemption, I think, in that bill relates to petroleum profit tax, which I think that as long as they continue to operate and make profits, I do not see anything wrong with exempting the PPT from that bill. For me, the major concern is the generality of Nigerians. You spoke about cash handouts. Can we do that? I am not sure. But is there something else we can do to, as palliatives to the majority of Nigerians? How many Nigerians are on mortgages? How many Nigerians can even afford, to pay their basic bills, their rent, for instance? How many Nigerians who daily earn a living, for them to be able to feed, they need to go out and work, and daily make a living for themselves and families. Now the country is heading towards a total lockdown. Are they able to survive? Are we able to have some form of cash relief, cash payments? Where would the money come from? How would it be disbursed? Commendable again that the CBN is taking some steps and is going all out to do what it can, But I think that what we need is a holistic approach to all of this, and this is where leadership comes in. We would expect to see some more leadership from the president, from the presidency. We would expect to see that there is some coherence, and all of this is brought into a singular package as much as possible, so that everyone feels the impact of these palliatives. We cannot afford to target the middle class and exempt the mass majority of Nigerians who would most likely feel the brunt heavier of COVID-19 and its implications. So I think that we need to double up very quickly. The Senate also needs to step up to the game. The House of Representatives has done what it has to do. The Senate needs to step up. I observed that there was a meeting yesterday at the National Assembly between the leaders of the National Assembly and, the ministers of budget, finance, and economic planning. But that meeting, I understand, was, focused around resetting the 2020 budgets, some form of resetting the indices, of that budget. We want to see a holistic, why that is going on. We want to see, clear, well-defined measures of how to make Nigerians, how to protect the mass majority of Nigerians from the suffering, from the biting hardship that is going to come upon us, God forbid. But these things have to happen. We need to see that leadership. If we do not see that leadership, we will continue to have ad hoc measures. We'll continue to have all of these, knee-jerk, stopgap, approaches, which may be temporary. And I note that the House of Representatives has a lifespan for this bill, 180 days, within which they would amend and look for ways to either go forward or retain its provisions. But then we need to see more coherence and some form of far-sighted thinking. Like I did say in my opening remarks, this COVID-19 disaster, as it is, provides an opportunity for reforms. We want to see Nigerians come out of this stronger, but more hopeful with their leadership, more hopeful with the kind of country that they call their own, more hopeful and more expectant of what the country can do for them and make them live a better life and give them a better living condition.
Well, Oke Epia, I think you monitor the National Assembly almost on a daily basis. You still need to help us clarify something. This bill, important as it is, well-meaning as it is it possible that it will go through while, the National Assembly is in recess on account of COVID-19? And you've talked about reform. Yes, all of us will want reform. And of course, you've stated the principle behind it, doing the best for the average Nigerian. But what kind of reforms would you like to see, and in what specific sectors, as a way of thinking ahead post-COVID-19?
Great questions, Dr. Bati. First of all, whether the National Assembly can come back from its recess and consider this bill, the House of Representatives did its work with some admirable alacrity. The Senate is on recess, and they did say to us that they can reconvene at short notice if they need to deal with urgent national matters. And nothing is more urgent than the national emergency we are finding ourselves, or we have found ourselves as a result of COVID-19. So yes, in answer to your question, the National Assembly, indeed the Senate is expected to convene as quickly as it can to consider this bill and have it sent to the President for assent, and consider all of these measures that are also coming from the executive. Like I said, the Minister of Finance, we're expecting to see, a supplementary appropriation bill. All of these will have to receive immediate attention from the National Assembly. So yes, they are aware, and I think they have indicated their readiness to reconvene as soon as they are requested to, or the need arises. And the need is already there, as you can see. So with respect to reforms, yes, Nigerians would like to come out of this and be able to have a clear sense of what subsidy is, or if not, going forward. For instance, we have seen a reduction in the price, pump price of PMS, but then this is a knee-jerk approach. It's a knee-jerk ad hoc measure. Doesn't this provide an opportunity for us to completely interrogate the subsidy regime and decide once and for all if this is something we want to continue? I mean, 125 naira is the price at the pump, but how many Nigerians are feeling the impact of this reduction? I understand that prices have not come down. In fact, they are going up. Transportation prices, already reacting to the near lockdown we are finding ourselves. So you see that reduction, as it were, is not making any impact. And that is a government, decided, a government decision to make that reduction. So we may as well, going forward, be thinking of how to look at how all of these payouts for subsidy, trillions and trillions of naira, that we pay for subsidy, could we find a way of reinvesting them into social services, into making our healthcare work, into making our education work, into making our, other sectors of national life, become comparable to what obtains in other parts of the world. And then the urgency, again, is revealed by the fact that it's a joke everywhere. I mean, dramatic as it is, but it is pungent and real that we are all in this together now. No one can travel abroad, to go and get medical care. Everyone has to stay back here. We'll have to go to Guagualara if the needs arises, to go and struggle with, the little amount of ventilators that are there. So all of these raises questions of how well we have managed, or we have mismanaged our natural resources, our national resources, respective provision of basic healthcare, for instance. So these are the kind of things we'd like to see. If we are not able to put forward a holistic, resetting of our national life, for instance, there are a couple of bills and, in the National Assembly that we can look at and quickly pass and have, come into effect as laws. For instance, there are bills around pro-poor, issues. I know, for instance, that the House of Reps Speaker has a bill for students' loans and all of that. So these are the kind of bills we'd like to see receive, immediate attention. Just yesterday, the bill on emergency economic stimulus was read for the first time. It was debated. It was passed. First, second, third reading and passed. That is really dramatic, and that's the kind of thing we'd like to see, the kind of urgency, sense of urgency, the kind of alacrity we'd like to see given to serious national issues that impact on the majority of Nigerians. So the opportunities for reforms, we can pigeonhole them into several aspects of our national life. I just gave one example. I just give another example of how we can address the issues of, providing palliatives for the poor. So we need to think all of this deeply and thoroughly and come up with measures. So before the end of all of this crisis, or at the end of all of this crisis, we would have seen this is where we are.
Can you hold your thoughts just for a second? I will take a short break and we'll be back to discuss more with you. Stay with us. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. We're still with Oke Epia, journalist and publisher of OrderPaperNigeria. Mr. Epia, before the break, you were answering Dr. Abati's question about reforms going forward. I want to take your thoughts on this import waiver that's contained in this bill. It's to last from the 1st of March to 31st of December this year, import waiver on crucial medical equipment. How should we extend this understanding of the importance of our health sector. If we were ever in any doubt before, now it's quite clear that this is a sector that has been overlooked to our detriment, because each year, as you well know, as somebody who analyzes the annual budget, we all have reports of how Nigeria's healthcare expenditure falls far below the benchmark recommended by the WHO, by the UN, by what have you. We all hear these stories. What needs to happen going forward now that this huge lapse has been exposed?
Great question. Speaking about import waivers but first of all, let me use this opportunity to commend compatriots on the front lines of this COVID-19. Our medical personnel, our doctors, our nurses, laboratory scientists, and all of them who are throwing themselves, possibly in harm's way to keep the rest of us safe, We have failed them as a nation. Our government has not done what it needs to do to keep them safe, to give them that confidence to do what they need to do with all sense of pride and confidence. But that, Mrs. May, we already have a way going forward. So the waivers for medical equipment and supplies, are for all of these, requirements and supplies that should give our medical personnel on the front line that sense of protection, to be able to deal with what they need to deal with on the front lines of COVID-19, the protective gears, the face mask, and all of that. So we think that this is one great element of that bill that makes the need to pass that bill really urgent, so that that waiver can come in. And these goods and supplies can begin to come into the country and they can begin to be deployed. My concern is that, the bill has a lifespan of 6 months. I don't know how long before it is passed and assented to and before it begins to be operationalized. So, importation, and all of the border closures here and there. So these are concerns. How long before we begin to have these equipments actually delivered and procured, installed for usage? These are concerns. But then, first steps first. We have made the first steps at the House of Representatives. We want to see the Senate quickly make that step and, the bill transmitted to the president for assent. So yeah, the second leg of a question about how all of these, exposes, the rot in our healthcare system. I mean, the story is already well known. We're in a crisis even before COVID-19 came on board on our healthcare system. We have never, we have never been close to the ambitious mark of 15% recommended for our budget by the World Health Organization. These are issues that have continually bothered, Nigerians. Our healthcare services are very poor. Our healthcare institutions are not doing any better than the services that they render. So by all means, this exposes the urgent need to take a critical look at our healthcare sector. After this stimulus, after this emergency, can we not afford to raise our budgetary allocations for the health sector and ensure some more accountability, in the dispensation of, in the dispensing and usage of resources in that sector? Can we not afford to see more qualified and empowered, manpower in that sector? Can we not afford to see, better equipped primary health care centers, teaching hospitals? It's a shame that may God not allow us to get to that point where we would require ventilators, on a large scale. That would be a major crisis on our hands, Is that an item that is really so impossible that we could not have had a couple of them across the country? The story about isolation centers and all of that. So we're in a big mess. COVID-19 just came to expose just how much the rot that we have in. But like I've said, the good thing about this is that we're all in this together, both the high and the mighty, the rich and the poor. We're all going to struggle together through this. And by the grace of God, this should teach us a lesson, to put our money where our mouth is.
Well, thank you, Oke Epia, for those comments you made about, the medical staff on the front line of the war against coronavirus, and your recommendation that they need to be given necessary protective equipment. But while commending them, yesterday I was reading some tweets on Twitter by a lady who studied microbiology, who is now doing something else. Part of the reform, of course, will be to ensure that we have people who have been trained are doing what they've been trained for. We have many doctors out there who are now working as barbers. We have pharmacists who are, selling clothes, in one market or the other. You know, we have issues with our school-to-work transition, and perhaps the education sector will be another major area of reform. But let me ask you, what is the mood in Abuja? Because here in Lagos, what I have seen so far, and the kind of conversation I've seen, is that the conversation is restricted more or less to the middle class. Middle-class persons are willing to self-isolate, they take necessary precautions. But the ordinary man who continues to go to the bus stops, when you listen to them, they will say, well, COVID-19 is a punishment for big people and rich people, whereas poor people is not a poor man's disease. What do you think of that? Do you think that, you know, an agency like the National Orientation Agency should be part of this public sensitization? Because as I said earlier this morning, the National Orientation Agency is even not part of the mobilization and sensitization process at all. Does that agency, does it still exist in this country?
Very good question. I would like that they are challenged enough to come and answer it by their works, in deed and not in words. You know, because many Nigerians on the streets, hardly aware or sufficiently informed, of the dangers of COVID-19. And this is not because this is partly because the communication, is not getting to them. The messaging is not getting to them in the way that they would understand and relate with. I do not know how many of these jingles, how many of these, images and messagings you see on social media, how many of them have been translated into indigenous local languages? I do not know how many of this caremongering that is, palpable amongst the elites and the middle class, like you rightly noted, is observed, at the lower level. It will take some time, but the question you have raised is very germane. Where is the National Orientation Agency? What are they doing? This is where an opportunity where they should show very clearly that they actually exist, not just in words, not just in name alone, but in deed and in truth. We need to see that agency live up to its responsibility. But again, this is a responsibility for all Nigerians. This is something that all Nigerians have a responsibility. We all have people in the villages. We all have people who look and depend on us. We all have people that we can influence one way or the other. We have to keep making that point to them that, look, COVID-19 is real. While we have to earn a living, we have to be careful and observe all the necessary precautions that we need to take, all of the personal hygiene and all of the, the steps that have been outlined by various, authorities for us to live, to stand a chance, to escape this. You and I need to keep engaging with Nigerians that we relate with in our individual networks and spheres. That is one contribution that we all need to make. But government, like I go back there again, needs to step up. The National Orientation Agency needs to step up. The Ministry of Information and Culture needs to step up. It's not enough to say that you are going to put the military on standby to go enforce, social distancing or stay-at-home orders. The military is already overstretched. Even the security forces, are you going to expose them to COVID-19 because they have to do their jobs? So it goes beyond just, like I've said, all of these are knee-jerk approaches and responses to a dilemma that we saw coming, but we didn't prepare for it. Talking about the mood in Abuja, I think it's very prevalent. The fear is highly within the elite class, like you already can observe. People around. I walked into this studio. As I walked into the studio, the premises down there is a ghost of itself, a shadow of its usual self. That is not, the transcore heating that we usually know. So you see that the elites, of course, they are responding to this with some measure of, of fear and good citizenship. A couple of them are not doing that. We need to prevail on them to do that. You know the story about some members of the National Assembly who reportedly came back from abroad, from countries that may have been suffering COVID-19, and they have refused to self-isolate, that they even refused to present themselves for screening at the airports. These are shameful acts. And I tell you, these are the kind of things that we should roundly condemn and demand that those who are in leadership and positions of authority should show leadership, should set the right examples. And I'm a bit disappointed that the House of Representatives and the National Assembly has not quite addressed this matter the way we should see it. Would expect the National Assembly, for instance, to demand, clearly that those who are involved in this, report should make themselves do the right thing. They should keep away from the National Assembly. It's not enough to shut it for 2 weeks in the first instance. I understand the bureaucracy of the National Assembly has also shut the system, so it's almost like an entire lockdown. down, except for very critical activities that need to happen. But then, those people who have been exposed, you know, consciously or inadvertently, they need to be told and made in clear terms, you know, convincingly so, to go and do the needful. They should go and take the test. They should self-isolate and keep away from the system. You know, how many people may have interacted with them? You know, how many people may have come in contact with them? So there's a lot of scare and worries about that environment, and that's the same story. The National Assembly is just a microcosm of the entire Abuja landscape as we speak. You know, so yes, it's a collective responsibility. I end on that note.
Thank you. Well, personally, I started wondering about the National Orientation Agency in the run-up to the general elections, but they have been making a few comments here and there. They've popped up in the press. About 3 weeks ago, there was a report that they're going to produce jingles. So whether it's a case of underfunding or inefficiency, that's unclear. But my question for you, you've talked about the panic of the middle class, the panic of the elites. We've seen abroad and at home, panic buying in supermarkets. We've seen what I suspect personally to be an attempt to panic hoard the equipment donated by Jack Ma, by the powers that be. What is to stop people from panicking in spite of this emergency bill that we have to commend the House of Reps for? I mean, they really did go out of their way. First, second, and third reading in one day is pretty much unprecedented. But is that really going to stop the panic? Is a 50% tax rebate enough to stop mass retrenchment, for example?
Again, that is the question that speaks to the place of leadership. Let me tell you what's going on in other jurisdictions. Take South Africa, for example. About a week or so ago, they came up with a robust regulation to deal with COVID-19, virtually a regulation that covers virtually all aspects of national life. With respect to the social consequences, talking about how to protect yourself, social distancing, the economic palliative measures, and all of that. So, but then we haven't seen that coming up here in Nigeria.
No, we haven't.
The National Assembly is reacting because
Mr.
there is no
Epia.
leadership. So we need to see leadership from
really do.
You know, the presidency.
Thank you, Mr. Epia. That's all we have time for.